Good evening, everyone. Hello. My name is Caroline Jean Fernald. I'm Executive Director of Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, a partnership of 4 public-serving museums where our mission is to connect collections and research at Harvard with global audiences, fostering community and deepening appreciation for science, the natural world, human cultures, and our shared experiences. With that mission in mind, I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's program, co-sponsored by the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East and the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, and made possible, of course, thanks to the generous support of our members and donors. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Lawrence M. Berman from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Today, he will explore the reigns of 3 powerful pharaohs and their impact on Egypt's art, politics, and religion. HMSC's partnership of museums crosses many disciplines, and we host a wide array of events throughout the year at our 4 museums. Tomorrow, October 16th, join us for the 2025 Tatiana Proskuryakov Award Lecture, honoring Dr. Clemency Coggins, an advocate for the ethical stewardship of cultural heritage and the protection of archaeological sites in the Americas. On October 23rd, join us for Arts Thursdays, Halloween at the Harvard Museum of Natural History. Wear your best costume, collect candy, and meet spooky specimens from vampire bats to zombie flies. On October 29th, Jason and Asia Lands will discuss Cambridge's old burying ground and reveal how they use non-invasive research tools to shed new light on slavery in New England, in death and burial in colonial Cambridge. To learn more about additional upcoming museum events, I invite you to visit our website, hmsc.harvard.edu, where you can sign up for our newsletter, or you can also follow us on social media. We are grateful to all of our members and supporters for making these programs possible. I will now turn it over to Peter Dermanuelian, Barbara Bell Professor of Egyptology and Director of the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Welcome to all of you. Happy almost Halloween, and a big greeting to all of those watching out online. Tonight we welcome all the way across the Charles River, the chair of the Department of the Art of Ancient Egypt, Nubia, and the Near East at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Dr. Lawrence Berman received his PhD in Egyptology from Yale University. Before joining the staff of the MFA, he was curator of Egyptian and Ancient Near Eastern art at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And at the MFA, Larry has curated or co-curated numerous exhibitions, special exhibitions, including Art and Empire, Treasures from Assyria in the British Museum, Secrets of Tomb 10A, one of my favorites, that was Egypt 2000 BC, about the tomb of Jehudi Nakht from Darrell Bersha, and Ancient Nubia Now. He's overseen numerous gallery installations, large and small, and most recently, masterpieces of Egyptian sculpture from the Pyramid Age and Faces of Ancient Egypt. Larry's taught ancient Egyptian art and language at Yale University, Case Western Reserve, and right here at Harvard. He's a frequent lecturer and has published a wide variety of scholarly articles. His many books include The Priest, the Prince, and the Pasha, and Unearthing Ancient Nubia, Photographs from the Harvard University Boston Museum of Fine Arts Expedition. His most recent book is Faces of Ancient Egypt, Portraits from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. These are beautifully produced volumes, by the way. I encourage you to take a look at all of them. He's traveled extensively in Egypt and northern Sudan, visiting all of the most important sites excavated by the Harvard MFA expedition. And from 2005 to 2009, he took part in the Pacific Lutheran University Valley of the Kings project, working in 6 undecorated tombs in the Royal Valley. His areas of research include, among many others, Middle Kingdom Egyptian art, history and literature, the art of Amenhotep III, the late period, portraiture in Egyptian art, the history of Egyptology, early Western travelers in Egypt and the Near East, and museology and its applications to ancient Egypt. His favorite accomplishments are his books and his gallery installations, and we in the Boston area have been the beneficiaries of both for many years now. Tonight, he will take us back to the 18th Dynasty. Please welcome Dr. Lawrence Berman.
Thank you, Peter. That was very nice. I hate to ruin it by going on with my talk, but it's great to be here and nice to see such a nice turnout. Today we're going to talk about three visionary pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, and Akhenaten. Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, and Akhenaten, all celebrated rulers who broke new ground. Each of them presents a different case. How successful were they? How were they received, both in their own time, by later Egyptians, and in modern times? The title, and indeed the idea, comes from my last book, Faces of Ancient Egypt, where it's chapter 4, called Mavericks and Glamour Kings. Amenhotep III provides the glamour. Next fall, just a year from now, we will have an exhibition at the MFA on this subject. So today, since I'm thinking about this quite a bit, I'd like to share with you a few of my ideas about the topic. So let's meet the pharaohs. So this is Hatshepsut, one of the most successful rulers ever of ancient Egypt, the daughter of Thutmose I and chief queen of Thutmose II. She ruled for 21 years, first as regent to her nephew and stepson Thutmose III, and then as full-fledged king beside him. She is a shapeshifter. She manipulated her image like no one else, and she had to. The concept, or rather the image of a king in ancient Egypt, was very much a male gendered concept, and she is experimenting or trying different ways to represent herself. Here we have three statues, all in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Metropolitan Museum has a great collection of Hatshepsut statuary because they excavated at her memorial temple at Deir el-Bahri. And on the left, she is shown wearing the royal Nemes headdress, but otherwise dressed and with the body of a woman. At the far right, she is shown as a male pharaoh. And in the middle, she's shown as a sphinx. So you think, what is she trying to do? This being a rather novel situation. The last female pharaoh that ruled Egypt was Queen Sebek-Nefru, who ruled just for 4 years at the end of the 12th dynasty. That would be the late 1700s BC, 324 years before Hatshepsut. And this is what she did in the center. You see she's wearing, it's a beautiful, beautiful fragment, but perhaps you can tell she's wearing a shift with straps, and on which is a woman's garment, and then on top of that she has the Nemes headdress and part of a pharaonic kilt. And Hatshepsut doesn't quite do that. We can concentrate now on her face, and it's easy to tell her from almost any other pharaoh, although not much of her contemporaries. If you look closely, you can see she's got her face shaped like an inverted pear, wide at the top and narrow at the chin. Large eyes beneath dramatically arched eyebrows. Her nose is small and pointed, her mouth small as well, with a full lower lip. She was a very ambitious ruler. She is known not only for her beautiful statuary, but also for the terrific monuments that she initiated and commissioned. Above all, the temple at Deir el-Bahri, and here we have it's beautifully situated against the cliffs behind which are the Valley of the Kings. If you look at it straight ahead, the whole building seems to merge into the cliffs, but actually it's a series of terraces and colonnades connected by ramps. You can get a better look at it now. If you climb up on top of the cliffs and look down, the whole thing unfolds before you. It's very instructive. It's a magnificent architectural conception. The colonnades have relief decorated scenes inside, and she has depicted there what she considered to be the chief events of her reign. And so those were an expedition she sent out to the land of Punt, which must be located somewhere along the Red Sea coast. There are many, many articles written about where Punt is. It could be that it wasn't always the same place, but in any case, it was a great trading expedition in which she brought back exotic products, and particularly incense trees, to use the incense in temple ceremonies. And on the other side, this would be the north side, we have scenes of her divine birth. It could be that Hatshepsut was particularly concerned with proving her legitimacy. She was the daughter of a king. She was the wife of a king. When her husband died young, the idea is that she would be regent, ruling on behalf of young Thutmose III, who must have been quite a young child at that time. But a few years later, she begins to adopt the titles and the style and the costume and the roles and all the trappings of Pharaoh. And it could be that she wanted to insist on her legitimacy by stressing her divine birth, by stressing above all her having been chosen, her closeness to her father. So the divine birth scenes are very interesting. They're very badly preserved for the most part. So actually I'm cheating here. And on the right, I'm showing you the scene that Amenhotep III had made in his temple of Luxor. And this is kind of interesting because people might think that Hatshepsut felt compelled to show the whole series of her divine birth because her legitimacy was somehow in question. But this would not have been an issue with Amenhotep III, who showed practically the exact same scenes. On the left, we have a drawing from Deir el-Bahri by Howard Carter, who started his career in Egypt not as an archaeologist, but as a painter and draftsman. And this is really very, very beautiful, as you can see. And on the right, we have a line drawing of the Amenhotep III scene. I'm not going to read the whole inscription for you, but I can kind of set the scene. Here is according to the myth, the god Amen or Amen-Ra visits the queen in her bedchamber, having assumed the form of her husband. But she quickly finds out that something special is he's not the husband that she's used to. We can read it. Words spoken by Amen-Ra, lord of the thrones of the two lands, when he had transformed himself into the majesty of this husband, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, I'll say Thutmose IV in this case, given life, he found her, the queen, as she was resting in the beauty of her palace. She awoke on account of the aroma of the god and cried out in front of his majesty. He went to her straight away and caused her to see him in his form of a god. She rejoiced at the sight of his beauty, and love of him coursed through all of her limbs. The palace was filled with the god's aroma. So next we see the result of this intimacy. And this is a nice scene from Hatshepsut's own. And we see Akhmose, Queen Akhmose, pregnant. You can see that. And she is escorted by the frog-headed goddess Heket and the ram-headed god Khnum to the birth chamber. So this is something she proclaims in this whole series. Now, right in back of the temple is the Valley of the Kings. And here is the entrance to Hatshepsut's tomb in the Valley of the Kings, one of the first, maybe even the very first, to be excavated in the Royal Valley. And these early 18th Dynasty tombs don't have monumental entrances. You would hardly even know. You know, they're hidden. And that was the idea. And the very first king who is said to have excavated a tomb in the Valley of the Kings was Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I. And according to an inscription of one of his officials, he does this, no one seeing, no one hearing. So the idea is that it should be kept kind of secret. The tomb was excavated in 1903 by Howard Carter, shown at the left, at work in the inner coffin of Tutankhamun, and at the very beginning of the career, which culminated in the discovery of the tomb, the nearly intact tomb of Tutankhamun. And here is the plan of the tomb. It's Howard Carter's plan of the tomb. I kind of like it. And it's interesting because it has two burial chambers. Here's one, and here's another one. The tomb descends into the cliff, and it's very, very bad limestone, and the interior is not decorated. I've never been in there. I never wanted to go in there. It was either cut for her father Thutmose I and expanded by Hatshepsut. So this would have been where he was buried. Maybe she came along later and built this. She would have added the second burial chamber when she became pharaoh and decided to join her father in his tomb, or the tomb was cut by Hatshepsut in the first place, who later expanded it and added the second burial chamber when she decided to move her father's remains there from another tomb where he might have been initially buried and where he was later moved. It gets very, very complicated. There are two sarcophagi here. Hatshepsut actually had, well, she has two tombs, one as a queen, which she abandoned, and one for king. Three sarcophagi, one for her as queen, one for her as, a second one for her as queen, and a third one for her as queen. And Thutmose I had two tombs, this one and another one, and two sarcophagi. So it's kind of difficult to keep track of. The burial chamber contained two sarcophagi. As I said, the one on the left is one that was meant for Hatshepsut in the end. The one on the right is one that she made for herself and then totally reinscribed for her father, who apparently had no stone sarcophagi. Now, Hatshepsut was an innovator. I mean, the Valley of the Kings was new. She continued the tradition of burying there, which was continued by her successors for a few hundred years already. She started the tradition, continued in the rest of the 18th Dynasty, of building these quartzite sarcophagi. Quartzite is a silicious sandstone, actually. It's quarried in the Red Mountain, the Quartzite Mountain opposite, by modern Cairo. It varies in color from brown to red to purple, all the colors of sunrise and sunset. It has solar associations and was therefore very appropriate for an instrument of resurrection, which is what the Egyptian coffin actually was. So she started that tradition too. And most of the time, Egyptian funerary equipment will not give you much historical information. You just get names and titles and beautiful prayers for the afterlife. But on the reverse, Hatshepsut added something to tell you what she did. So this is the front of the coffin. You always know the front from where the eyes are. This is the back of the coffin. And she adds, Hatshepsut, made it as a monument for her beloved father, the good God, Lord of the two lands, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Akhenaten, son of Ra Thutmose, vindicated. And there are figures of funerary and cosmic gods all around it, and each of their faces is a little portrait of Hatshepsut. You see on the left, there's a kneeling goddess over a sign for gold. She has her name on her head. She's Isis. And next to her, we have a male deity that's one of the sons of Horus, Quebecenouef. So cute little faces. Something else that Hatshepsut was very, very proud of were her obelisks. She erected two pair at Karnak Temple, and the one on the right is still standing. This is it's the tallest standing obelisk in Egypt, 97.5 feet tall and weighs 323 tons. Fragments of its shattered companion lie broken on the ground. So, and this is the whole top of it, which has been moved out of the Temple of Karnak. They're in this narrow hall and placed by the sacred lake. Many of you, or some of you, may have seen it there. It is a very heavily decorated obelisk, and she was really proud of this. And so the scenes of the transport of the obelisks are circled in red here, and the scenes are rather badly preserved, but still you can see this enormous barge right here. And on that barge are the two obelisks, and they're placed base to base, so it's heaviest in the center. And on the right, you can see the beginnings of the towboats. And there are actually 3 lines of towboats, 10 each. And the whole thing is escorted by a whole flotilla. It must have been a magnificent thing to do. So the quarrying, transport, and erection of these granite monoliths required immense resources. Not only were they made of solid granite, but their upper surfaces were sheathed in electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of silver and gold, much prized by the Egyptians. The effect of these skyscrapers gleaming in the sun must have been incredible. And the obelisks are inscribed as Hatshepsut herself explains in the inscription on the base of the standing obelisk. She made it as her monument to her father Amen, lord of the thrones of the two lands, presiding over Karnak, making for him two great obelisks of hard granite of the south, their upper side being of electrum, probably meaning the top portion, of the best of all foreign lands. Seen on both sides of the river, their rays flood the two lands when Aten, the sun disk, dawns between them as he rises in heaven's light land. They are each of one block of hard granite, without seam, without joining at all. And then she tells you exactly when she started work on them and how long it took. My Majesty began work on them in year 15, her 15th year on the throne, and she gives the exact date. Totally 7 months of quarry work. I gave for them of the finest electrum. I measured the electrum by the gallon like sacks of grain. My Majesty summoned a quantity beyond what the two lands had seen. So quite amazing, because the shipment of the obelisk is 130 miles downstream from Aswan to Luxor. So here I have turned that fragment sideways, so it's pointing up. And I've got a drawing in the center by William Stevenson Smith, great art historian of ancient Egyptian art, former curator of Egyptian art at the Museum of Fine Arts, because it so happens that at the Museum of Fine Arts, we have two fragments of this obelisk that were brought to this country in the 1830s, among the very first monumental Egyptian sculpture ever to come to this country. And Bill Smith was brilliant at placing scattered fragments. And you can see here, we have the Boston fragment, which is that fragment that you see over here. And there's another one that goes around the side here. And so, although these two fragments did not necessarily come from the same register, the normal arrangement would be the king is on one side, offering to the god on the other. So it would be nice to show them that way. And this is one thing we hope to do. And notice that the queen here is shown like any male pharaoh, indistinguishable from any male pharaoh. This is a big public monument. People looking at this monument, they can't read anyway. They have to know who's who in the scene. People have to be able to identify the king. And so this looks like the king. She's not pretending to be a man. She's showing herself acting as king. The inscription she's using always feminine pronouns. She's not pretending to be anything, but she wants people to be able to identify her. This is the king. And her name is, well, Hatshepsut is one of her names. She has several others too. Also at Karnak, she did some amazing things that she never got credit for, but all of which were realized in the end, later by Amenhotep III. The Temple of Karnak was basically just this much. And here we're facing to the Nile, to the west. And it's like most Egyptian temples oriented towards the river. But there's also an axis that extends south to the Temple of Luxor. And the god Amen was carried in procession south to Luxor. And there had always been places where he would have stopped, but it was not, the stations were not marked in the form of monumental architecture. And Hatshepsut erected a massive pylon, which would have been along the southern axis. And this blue, this is her pylon. This is it here. You can see what it looks like. It's huge. And actually, the southern axis was later extended by Amenhotep III. This is his 10th pylon. And this is a relief showing the boat carrying the image of the god, which is inside this shrine, which is in turn covered by a cloth because it's very holy and it has to be shielded from come and gaze. And this is how the god Amen was carried south. This comes from a sanctuary that she had erected right in the center, but which was later dismantled, not because of any animus against her, but because the temple was being expanded and the blocks were reincorporated in a new building. And they're going south to the Temple of Luxor, which you see here, extended along the banks. This is different from most Egyptian temples. It's not oriented towards the river, oriented towards another temple. And although this temple is built by Amenhotep III and expanded by Tutankhamun and Ramesses II, Hatshepsut had first built a structure here which was not so monumental and doesn't remain anymore. And what she had in her mind to do was to delineate the cosmic landscape of ancient Luxor on the east bank and on the website bank, which was united by religious processions and festivals. So we have one that we have here, we just looked at. This is the Karnak temple. We have the festival of Opet, and so the god travels in his boat over land, portable boat carried on the shoulders of priests from here to there. Then there was another festival, the beautiful Feast of the Valley, in which the god goes across the river to the memorial temples on the west bank. So here is Deir al-Bakhri right across from Karnak. And then there was another festival that went from Luxor Temple across the river to Medinet Habu, which occurred more regularly. So she's just trying to link all of these parts together. Now, Hatshepsut and Thutmose III ruled together for 21 years. There was no evidence that anything was amiss. On the left, we see both of the kings together. They look absolutely identical. The only way that you can tell the difference is reading the cartouches above their name. And here we have on top, this is Ma-Ka-Ra, which is Hatshepsut, and there was Thutmose. But then something happened. Hatshepsut disappeared, presumably she died, and 20 years after her death, for reasons still not fully understood, Thutmose III had her statue shattered and her name expunged from the monuments. He even walled up the lower parts of her obelisks so that at ground level no one could see her work. In modern times, Hatshepsut, people used to think, oh, he must have been so resentful of her that immediately he erased her name and obliterated her. But he didn't do this until 20 years after her death. So after her death, so there must have been some other reasons. In modern times, her reputation has suffered at the hands of not Victorian-era Egyptologists, but Victorian-era-minded Egyptologists and their successors who seem much more alarmed by the idea of a female pharaoh than the ancient Egyptians were. It was unusual, but not unheard of. You'll read things, oh, you can't have a female Horus, but you can. You just add a feminine ending to the name. You can't be, you can be daughter of Ra instead of son of Ra. It works. It makes me think there's a wonderful quote that's attributed to Cleopatra, who said to the Romans, I will not be the first woman to rule the Nile Valley. We have no law against female, sovereigns here. It's been claimed that she usurped the throne and maintained her positions through liaisons with powerful men at court. As such, she has suffered the same bad press as other strong female rulers from Cleopatra to Catherine the Great. It is only recently that she has been given her due respect as one of the greatest of all pharaohs. So here you see, the figures of the two rulers together in this building that was demolished. Here on the right, we see the names of Thutmose III perfectly preserved. Hatshepsut's names are erased. Another scene at Karnak Temple. You see the gods Thoth and Horus are pouring the water of life, streams of Ankh signs above an obliterated figure who was Hatshepsut. And they left this there. But they don't tell you who it was. Her statues are all broken up and dispersed. This beautiful yellow limestone statue at the Metropolitan Museum was found in two successive stages. The body of it, below the neck, was taken to Berlin in 1845. The fragments of the head were discovered by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1926-27. They had to effect a trade. And so it's all put together. Hatshepsut's portrait style was very, very influential. It's very hard to tell the difference between the two rulers, Thutmose III and Hatshepsut. And this is an interesting case in point. There was a wonderful book that accompanied an exhibition. The book is by Ed Blyberg, and the exhibition was called Striking Power. And it discusses iconoclasm, which is a very interesting topic, and statues are destroyed and people's memories are effaced for different kinds of reasons. And the type of damage that you see on a head can help you decide who it was. So on the right is a granodiorite head in the Brooklyn Museum that was identified as either Hatshepsut or Thutmose III. But the damage done is very telling. Well, the nose has been obliterated, and this is a way of killing the statue. The statues are, once they were animated by the mouth opening ceremony, they were able to be fit, to be occupied by the spirit of a king or god or anybody. And that's been obliterated, but also the cobra on her head has been attacked. This is a symbol of royalty. And also the big Nemes headdress, which fans out on either side of its head, has also been broken very, very carefully. This is not a naturally occurring damage. You have to work at this. This is damage that's aimed at these parts. If it falls down, the whole surrounding area is not going to break. And so Thutmose III's images were never attacked in this way, but Hatshepsut's were, and this is one reason that shifts the balance in her favor. On the left, we see a head in Greywacke, wonderful stone, and that's in Cleveland, and that's also, we've always wondered, is it Hatshepsut or Thutmose III? We've always dated it as Hatshepsut. I myself dated it as Hatshepsut when I worked in Cleveland. I did a catalog of the collection, and I came down in favor of Hatshepsut with a question mark, basically for stylistic reasons. But when I read Striking Power and I look at the damage now done to this head, I now think that it's much more likely to be Hatshepsut. Even though this was not a stone she favored so much, and her son did like this stone, look at the damage. Obviously the nose has been damaged, and the shaving down was done in modern times to receive a modern nose, which was very misleading, so we took it off. But also the uraeus, the cobra, has been damaged, and also the entire, the wings of the Nemes headdress have been knocked off, again, with great effort. So all that's left is the portrait. And since this was never done to Thutmose III's portrait, it makes it more likely that this type of damage was done to a head of Hatshepsut. So it's interesting. Now, the portrait type of Hatshepsut also was adopted by her high officials, who they were not modest people. So they like to express their achievements, but nothing was higher, more important to them than to be associated with the king, with the pharaoh that they served. So here we have Hatshepsut in the center. On the left, we have her closest official, chief steward of Amen and royal tutor to her daughter, Senmut, in Fort Worth, and on the right we have a priest, the second prophet of Amen, whose funerary statuette is in the MFA, and very, very similar portrait types. And this was a very long-lived portrait type that was frequently revised. I mean, in the words of Anne Russman, a great art historian of ancient Egyptian art, she calls this the most satisfactory and successful idealism ever created. And in the center, I have image of a statue in the MFA from the 7th century BC, and it doesn't look like Hatshepsut, but that very clean, very glossy, very elegant look, very idealized, is a hearkening back over many centuries to the 18th Dynasty style, which persisted. So now we're going to turn to our next pharaoh, who's Amenhotep III, about whom there was never question of his legitimacy, and was perhaps in terms of statue production, the most generous patron of Egyptian art that ever existed. So on the left we have Amenhotep III, his head in the MFA. On the right we have the 70 feet tall statues of called the Colossi of Memnon in front of his memorial temple on the west bank of Thebes, and which is the site of some of the most interesting work going on in Egypt today, if you ask me, because the area behind it was all covered with sugarcane, and it was very difficult to excavate there because of the ground level, the moisture. But now Huruk-Saruzian and her team have been clearing this, and in behind the Colossi of Memnon, you can see she's been putting together and re-erecting, in fact, resurrecting other gigantic statues. This was a temple that was so large, it was as big as Karnak, if not even bigger at that time. His face, again, very different from Hatshepsut, but immediately recognizable. This is he ruled for 38 years, extremely prosperous. Hatshepsut and Amenhotep III are noted for they're not warlike reigns. Some people take issue, the peaceful reign, as though you have to be belligerent and aggressive in order to be a good king, but you could also be peaceful and sponsor works at home and and trading expeditions. You don't have to go rampaging around the Near East and Nubia to be a great king. So he instead was concentrating on work at home, which I admire quite more. But here in these faces, we have images of the king that represent the king at the left and on the right. And in the center, we have the head of a deity in granite. Below him, a much battered but beautifully carved quartzite head, purplish red quartzite head. Even in its battered state, you can tell that it was a very beautiful statue. And all of these heads had bodies. So, that's all we have now. And his features are immediately discernible. He has elongated eyes and a very wide mouth with the upper lip larger than the lower lip, and the suggestion of an overbite on the upper lip. You can kind of see that. The image on the right here is a little statuette that we just acquired a couple of years ago. It's only a few inches tall. So not only does he make medium and large statues, he makes small statues too. You can see here another little statue that's in the MFA, and you see the king is very youthful looking. On the right, we have a head of the king in quartzite in Cleveland, and the features are so close. He's wearing a short, round wig. And the iconography of this statue is suggestive of Neferhotep, which is a child god. Now, Amenhotep III rules for 38 years. In his 30th year, he celebrates what the Egyptians called a Sed festival. We usually call a jubilee. It marks a stage in the reign. The king's powers are ritually renewed, and he is rejuvenated. And the king must have been in his 50s, at this point after 30 years of rule. But the older he gets, the younger he looks. And that's expressed in the iconography. He has a round face. He has a chubby little belly, as you see. And let's look back a little. He's glazed green. This is a soft stone called steatite. And I'll show you a much greener example later. But in Egypt, as now, to be green means to be fresh, like new grass, new vegetables, to be young, to be fresh. So there's an iconography that's suggested by the color of the stone. So you see that here. Now, Amenhotep III had a queen by the name of Ti, so Queen Ti, and although not a pharaoh like Hatshepsut was, she's extremely powerful and prominent, more so than most queens in the king's reign. Images of her also show the features of her husband. So these are the diagnostic for the reign of Amenhotep III. We see her on the left, and on the far right, she is shown with the attributes of the goddess Hathor. It's unfortunate that the head on the right is damaged in such a way because it looks like she has a bobbed hairstyle, but no, instead she has this very full hairstyle like you would have had over here. And in the center, we have her represented on a carnelian bracelet plaque in the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a winged sphinx, which is odd for a queen, and she's holding in her hand the cartouche, the name of her husband. The object on the right, in case you are wondering, it's called a menot, and it's a necklace counterpoise. The Egyptians wore these very heavy necklaces in order to keep them in place. You needed something in the back. But this was not necessarily used as that. The counterpoise was a ritual object in its own right, and it's carried, women carried them in their hands. In the center, I can show you an illustration from a Theban tomb of this period, the tomb of Nakht, and we see that his wife is holding in one hand a sistrum, and here we have another one of these menots, not open work, with the necklace attached. She's not wearing it as a necklace. They would have shaken that also in temple ceremonies. So just so you know what that was. On the right here, we have another image of her in the Louvre, and the head on the left is one that's in the MFA. And both of these, interestingly, were originally part of group statues. I mean, obviously, the statue on the right was part of a group because we have this isolated arm, you know, on the queen's right side, and that would have belonged to the king. And perhaps even there was another figure to the viewers left of the king, one of the princesses. And if you look at the back in the center of the MFA piece, you can see that this is only half of an inscription that would have repeated on the opposite side. So here we've got one snake, and this snake would have been hanging down from a sun disk. And so you would have had another snake on that side, enough room for another figure to fill it out. And this stone, which is called peridotite, is a very rare stone, but it's green. Again, we have the suggestion of youthfulness and rejuvenation shown in this case as well. Another feature of his reign that's characteristic was large animal sculptures. So we've got on either side here, two statues of the lioness-headed goddess Sekhmet, the goddess of aggression. And on the center, we've got a cobra, unfortunately missing its head, representing Selket, whom you may know best as a scorpion, but I think cobra, scorpion, both poisonous reptiles. That was what they had in common. And the other one is a falcon, as a mummified falcon, representing here the god, the falcon god Necheni of Hierakonpolis, the falcon city. And the Sekhmet statues are very interesting because many were found in the temple of Mut at Karnak, and here they are so picturesque, the subject of many old paintings. To give you an idea of the intensity and magnitude of the sculpture production in this reign, that it was originally believed that there were, let's say, 365 of these Sekhmet statues, one for every day of the year. But excavations at the Mut temple and excavations at the Memorial temple keep on turning up more. So many more that then we started to think, well, maybe it was 600 or so statues, maybe one for every morning and maybe one for every night. But now the number has approached 1,000, and I don't know what that stands for, but and these are just the Sekhmet statues, not the cobras. There are cobras, there are hippopotami, there are crocodiles, and then there was all the sculpture production representing the king himself. And then the great statues that are done for his officials, which are all coming from the same quarrying, expeditions. It's absolutely incredible the amount of work that was accomplished, and not only that, the very high quality of this work. These hard stones are polished to a glossy finish. They feel like satin, and that's extremely labor intensive. And here we have them arranged now. They're a little bit more orderly in the temples. So that's the Sekhmet statues, and they all have wonderful names. It's as though this ferocious goddess, the goddess of plague, pestilence, warfare, was being cajoled and subdued. The feline goddesses, like felines today, It can go both ways. They can be wild and they can be nasty, or or they could be like house cats or domestic. And so you soothe them. There are many ways of soothing them. You can shake your rattle and go shh, which they seem to like. My cat does. And also you can call them by nice names. So this one is Sekhmet, whose flesh is gold. It's wonderful. And of course, the Egyptian statues of deities were often made of gold. Egyptian gods are described in texts in terms of their cult statues. So they have flesh of gold and eyes and hair of lapis and bones of electrum, just like their cult statues. It's amazing. Now, the falcon and the cobra, which are in the MFA, come from Amenhotep III's temple at Soleb in northern Sudan. It's very frustrating because we have like 2 or 3 cobra heads in our basement and none of them fit this cobra. So, but you see the wonderful serpentine coils, and they come from this wonderful temple at Soleb, which looks kind of like Luxor Temple, which I visited in the 1980s. And this was a temple in which the king is worshiping himself. Very, very interesting. The king is shown here. Here he is on the right. And here's his name, Neb-Ma'at-Ra, the name by which he went. And he's worshiping this other god who was a moon god. He's got the lunar disk and crescent, which is, and the god's name is Neb-Ma'at-Ra, Amenhotep, Lord of Nubia. This made a big impression in northern Sudan when the king was worshipped, and he's described as the one who dwells in the fortress of Ma'at, which was the name of the temple of Soleb. Now, hundreds of years later, the Kushite kings of northern Sudan had these sculptures removed to adorn another temple of Amen at Jebel Barkal, farther to the south, where the Harvard University Museum of Fine Arts expedition excavated many of them in 1916. And here you can see the fragments of the hawk as found, which is really very interesting because the top of it is on top of the bottom is on top of the head. This is the head, and this is the bottom, and we're kind of missing the middle of it. There was a lot of disturbance in this temple. And that's not all. This was found in 1919, but right opposite it, the 2 falcon statues originally would have been in the central nave of a columned hall, and they would have been one facing the other. But already in the early 1800s, 1830s, 1840s, another one was found and brought to Berlin. So here we see, this was the very lavishly outfitted Prussian expedition to Egypt and Sudan, led by Richard Lepsius. And we have the site of Jebel Barkal here, and people dragging a colossal ram statue, which I'll show you in a minute. But this one is in Berlin, and actually the whole top part is restored. Here you can see the line of the break. And so the bottom was what was found and taken over there. So there were 2 of these. In addition to that, there's this great ram in Berlin. The sun disk and horns are later additions, but they originally had them. And the ram is protecting the king. And there still exist many of them at the site of the temple, and also a couple very, very battered at the Soleb temple. And on the right, one of a pair of lions. Again, this is a resting feline goddess. The wild goddess has been pacified. And these were collected by a British nobleman in the early 1800s and are now in the British Museum. They're very famous. So this wonderful animal sculpture. And I think an important thing to remember is that Amenhotep, this is all new. I mean, the number of large animals. Amenhotep III relished the abundance of imagery and the variety and the great number of gods, the richness of the Egyptian pantheon. He loved them all and made big statues of them all. And he was able to unify them by linking them each with the sun. I mean, Amenhotep III himself calls himself the dazzling sun disk of all lands. And so there is an emphasis on the sun, but not to the exclusion of other deities. It embraced all the other deities who had their independent existence. And this is an important thing to remember when we turn to his son Akhenaten, who did quite the opposite. Now, Amenhotep III his legitimacy was never challenged. No one destroyed his monuments. People took them over, but out of admiration rather than because they didn't like him for one reason or another. And you can see examples where his statuary was appropriated by later kings, notably Ramesses II and Ramesses' son, Merneptah. So on the right, we see a statue in the Metropolitan Museum, which has the features of Amenhotep III. So it hasn't been recarved, but it's got the cartouches of Amenhotep, of Merneptah. On the left, we have an early photograph that I love of a colossal statue of Ramesses II, which may or may not have originally been an Amenhotep III statue, which is something I'd like to do a little bit more work on. But it's the same format of a whole series of Amenhotep III seated statues made of granodiorite. Now, Ramesses II ruled for 67 years. He was a mighty king and built many monuments in his own right. He didn't have to take over anything. In this case, I think it's more a matter of emulation. And we know that Ramesses admired Amenhotep III because of the cult of royal statues, which he's had, the whole ensemble at Abu Simbel, where we have a temple devoted to him, and another one devoted to his queen, which echoes what we have in northern Sudan for Amenhotep III. We have his temple at Soleb, and there was a temple for Queen T a little farther away at a place called Sedinga. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. Now, Amenhotep III was succeeded by his son, who was another Amenhotep, but he's better known by the name that he changed to, and that is Akhenaten. So Akhenaten ruled for 17 years, and in his 6th year on the throne, he changed his name, as I just said. And he moved the capital of the country some 250 miles north to a place called El Amarna, which he called Akhenaten, dedicated to the worship of the sun disk Aten. And elsewhere the temples of the gods were closed and their images destroyed and their names expunged because there was now no god but Aten. And here on the right we see a relief of Akhenaten at the MFA. And he's represented as a human-handed sphinx, and he holds the cartouches of his god, the Aten, who does not have a real form. And it's interesting, the cartouches spell out a whole theology. It's not just the Aten. I mean, his name is written here, and his name is written here, and here we've got Amenhotep III's name, and here we've got Nefertiti's reign, So we've got Ra-Harakti, old god, who rejoices in the horizon in his name of Shu, the light, which is in the sun disk, because he's worshiping something ineffable, really. It's the life-giving rays of the sun. And you see, it's a wonderful concept. The rays of the sun end in human hands, which extend to the king's nostrils the sign of life. So he's really basking in the life-giving rays of the sun. And just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, Amarna, or Akhenaten, it's far. It's halfway between Memphis, the ancient capital, and Luxor, the homeland of the 18th Dynasty king. And you don't see much at the site now because the buildings were dilapidated. But he demarcated the territory of his new city. It's an enormous area, on both sides of the Nile, on the east where the cliffs are, and then all the way to the right where there's a lot of agricultural land. And he demarcated them by erecting these stelae, which are carved into the rock with statues that are engaged, statues over here. And this site was found by Western explorers, in this case Robert Hay, in the early 1800s, and they were entirely mystified by this radical new style. You can see examples, this beautiful photograph that Chester Higgins has in his nice Sacred Nile book. And if you look at the proportions of the figures, they're almost the reverse of what you would expect, the traditional heroic proportions of the human figure. We have very long faces and narrow shoulders, if you can see, and high waists, and abnormally large buttocks and thighs, and really thin, spindly limbs. So not heroic looking at all. And we have the king, and he's followed by the queen and two daughters. Again, he loved to show family, and he did that. On the left, we have a stele from a private shrine that's in Berlin, and we have the king on the left, and Nefertiti, you can always tell, she just looks just like him, but you can tell she has her distinctive crown, and the daughter's on her lap, and he's holding one of the children too, and these are family scenes. And you think there must be a root of this. Amenhotep III, who you see on a similar type of monument on the right, is also shown. His features are not so reversed, but he's definitely on the plump side before a table of offerings. And you wonder where the iconography comes from, because this is something that happens sudden, although the artist had to draw on something. I mean, how do you figure out? What do you go to? What do you know? And so, these somewhat haggard facial features may come from depictions of foreigners, like you have on this fragment on the left. And the plump figures with the exaggerated breasts and buttocks come from representations of fecundity figures, such as you see on the right, which once adorned the throne of a king. But this happened so fast. And interestingly, we have in Berlin a statue of a man called Bach and his wife. He's Akhenaten's chief sculptor, and he actually tells you on an inscription, not here, that he was personally instructed by the king how to make his image. And we also have images, we have sculptors' trial pieces, and you can see the artists coming to grasp that they have to make something new now. I mean, when you look at Akhenaten, he's almost telling you, look at me, I'm different, but how do you portray this? So they start with figures sketched in like this, and then, practice makes perfect. They turn into statues like this, or reliefs. These come from tomb blocks. On the left, we have a princess. And again, we have lots of family scenes. And there's such a terrific appeal for the art of Akhenaten. And a couple of reasons for this. I mean, I think since he's banished the gods and goddesses, the traditional ones, you don't see the animals and the animal-headed gods. You see concentration on the royal family and intimate scenes. And also, you see the elegance, once they've refined the style, of these very sinuous, curved, seductive lines, which are immediately appealing. So we're coming to the end. It all ends very, very quickly, because in the reign of his successor, Tutankhamun, who also succeeded to the throne as a young man, he reverses what had been done by his father, and there is a famous decree that he issues, the restoration, stela, and he tells you, when he came to the throne, he found that the temples of the gods were in ruin, and they were overgrown, and the statues were broken, and he remade everything better than it was before, and his statues of the gods were bigger, and he hired more priests, and they sent more offerings. Everything was reversed. And he was also, Akhenaten was erased from Egyptian records. They never referred to him. But he has exerted this terrific fascination since the time of his discovery in modern times. This is my last slide, but you can see the idea that the king promulgated, he hated images of the gods. His god did not have a physical form. There were no statues of this god. It's one god, so he's taken to be the first monotheist. People like Sigmund Freud, who wrote Moses and Monotheism. For him, Moses was an acolyte of Akhenaten, who, took Atenism to Israel. We have contemporary artists like Lorraine O'Grady, who just passed away, lovely, and she takes the scenes from Amarna art showing the king and his daughters and instead poses members of her own family like that. Or we have this is a huge neon ensemble of representing Nefertiti, who has become totally assimilated into pop culture like nobody else. So I hope that what you've seen has demonstrated that, first of all Egyptian art does not look alike. These kings were very, very skilled at using art and architecture to advance their own agendas, and that the patrons and the artists had some agency of their own. They could do new things, and they could react to them, and they could be creative. And so for me, this is something that I always wanted to get across for people because, the Egyptians, of course, what makes Egyptian art Egyptian is what makes most people think it all looks alike. But once you get used to the conventions and you study a little bit of the history, you see through the conventions, which reveals the creativity and the freedom that the Egyptian style actually permitted. Thank you very much.